A lot of players think that when you play controller, you just place your smokes in standard spots and call it a day. But that's not even close to the full picture. There are actually way more types of smokes that most people don't even realize exist. Standard smokes, lurk smokes, sight smokes, and that's just the start. In this video, we're going to be breaking down every single type, starting with the basics and working our way all the way to the more advanced stuff. You're going to learn exactly when to use each type of smoke, and you'll understand how to counter the enemy's smokes. Most importantly, you will know how to actually get value out of your utility instead of just copying the same setups that everyone else uses. So whether you're a controller main looking to level up your game, or you just want to understand how smokes work better, this guide is going to help you out. Let's get into it, starting out with our most basic type, standard smokes. These are, as mentioned, your standard smokes, but you might also hear them referred to as flush smokes, execute smokes, or retake smokes. When you first start learning controller, these are probably the first smokes that you're going to learn. Most people think that when you play smokes, you just place these standard smokes in the entryway, which is true a lot of the times. The key thing with these smokes though is that you want them to be flushed in the doorway. You don't want them bleeding out into the entrance at all. And the reason for this is simple. When the smoke bleeds out, it actually gives the enemy more room to work with than when they were trying to push through. If they can strafe out the sides of the smoke, suddenly you have a lot more options for movement and it becomes a little bit harder to hold. When you place a proper flush smoke, it should make it really uncomfortable for anyone trying to push through. If there's a flush smoke in your way and you don't have any utility to help you out, you're probably not getting through that choke point without dying. This is what makes them so crucial for executes and retakes. You're basically telling the enemy team that they can't come through that area. But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes your standard smoke might vary beyond what you'd originally think, depending on what you're smoking. Take Haven, for example. When you put a standard smoke in those spawn choke points on A and C, you might actually be hurting yourself. The enemies can now swing out and isolate backside or hell, and suddenly your teammates are in a lot of trouble. Instead, it's actually a bit more favorable to place the smoke out like this, where they need to peek out into the open to actually take a fight. Another great example of this is over on Bind A site. That smoke next to triple that everyone uses has some interesting properties. A lot of people like to place it flush in the back, and yeah, that does push defenders away from getting that cheeky Bucky kill, but it also lets attackers use triple to isolate short, which can be really bad for your team. In spots like this, sometimes pulling that smoke a little bit closer is actually the better play. So while these are your bread and butter smokes, you still need to think about how they affect the space around them. Don't just throw them out because that's where they go. Think about what you're trying to accomplish with them. The purpose of your smokes matters. You could be trying to stop a push, you could be trying to protect your team from an execute. The important part is that you're making sure your smoke placement matches what you're trying to do. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot more to ranking up than just placing a couple of fancy smoke. One of the most important things in the game that you need to learn how to do is aim. And aiming is hard, and if you feel like you whiff a lot, then you're going to need something more than just this guide. That's why over at SkillCapped, we have recently published a brand new Calm Aim course that details how any one of you could develop Radiant level aim in just a few weeks. While most players just aim in whatever way feels most comfortable, it might surprise you to hear that there's actually a proper aiming technique that pros use that not only makes themselves more consistent, but it also helps them get more kills like this. In our course, we are going to teach you this proper aiming technique and even provide you with an aiming routine that you can use to instantly start improving your aim and climbing today. Unlike other routines, this is a simple less than 15-minute exercise that you can do before you play that will do wonders for your aim. Not only that, but our site is literally backed by a rank improvement guarantee, so if you don't climb, you don't pay. If you're really looking to climb this act and want to actually start fragging out in your matches, be sure to check out our new Calm Aim course using the link below. And other than that, let's take a look at our next smoke. Now it's time to talk about lurk smokes, and these are pretty different from your standard smokes. The whole point of a lurk smoke is to deny information from the enemy team. These smokes look a little bit different from your standard ones. Instead of being tight in the doorway, lurk smokes are going to be used in the exact opposite way. They're usually placed towards the center of the map or on the front of a site and are generally placed by an attacker. You'll notice these actually bleed out into the entryway a bit, which, as you would guess, is the opposite of what defenders normally want. Unlike flush smokes that try to stop pushes completely, lurk smokes are actually designed to be easier for the attackers to push through. The real power of these smokes, however, comes from making the enemy's team uncertain. When you throw a lurk smoke, you want to deny the defenders info on crucial areas of the map. They have no idea if somebody's crossed through or if they're about to push or what's going on. These lurk smokes force the defenders to make a choice. They either have to use some form of utility to check what's happening on the other side, or they just have to remain nervous about that area. A lot of the times you'll see defenders use Sentinel utility to deal with lurk smokes. Sometimes they'll throw Initiator utility like a Sova dart or a drone just to clear it out. And this makes sense because in Valorant, information is an absolutely necessary resource. The less information that the defenders have, the harder it is for them to make the right calls. That's exactly what lurk smokes are designed to do. They cut off crucial information and they make it harder for defenders to know what's happening in the round. These are primarily an attacking tool and they work best during defaults. But there's a common problem with lurk smokes in ranked. Teams often move too fast to get real value out of them, which means that you still want to have standard smokes ready for executes, and most controllers only have 2 smokes at one time. If your team is just slamming sites, you don't really have time to place a Lurk Smoke, but if you're mid-rounding and need to create an opening, Lurk Smokes are a great option. Agents like Omen and Astra excel at using these Lurk Smokes. Even a Cypher might be able to throw something like this to help create openings for his team. The key is timing. You throw these when you want to create questions for the defenders. This way, you're constantly forcing the defenders to guess on what's happening in your round. The key to remember here, though, is that a Lurk Smoke is about creating uncertainty. Now it's time to talk about sight smokes. Now these are probably one of the most underutilized types of smokes in the game. As a defender, these are absolutely your bread and butter when you're playing controller. Unlike other smokes, sight smokes are specifically designed to give defenders room to play around with on sight. They're not meant to stop a push necessarily, they're just meant to make it difficult to deal with the sight anchor. Here's how they work. Instead of smoking entrances, you're smoking parts of the actual site itself. This creates space for you to reposition, rat inside the smoke, and wait for your team's utility or rotates to come in. Now the power of a sight smoke really becomes clear when the enemy team is executing. Think about it from an attacker's perspective. They can't just rush into the sight smoke or you're probably going to kill them. There could be a Bucky waiting for them in there ready to one-tap them, and pushing smokes is generally just really dangerous. But that's not even the scariest part. The real threat comes when your teammates start throwing utility for you. Imagine a KO flash landing above the smoke for you to swing out of, or a Sova dart landing outside of the smoke for you to get spam kills. These sorts of things can spell disaster for the attacking team. A great example of a sight smoke is on A site ascent. Placing it in the middle of sight gives you a ton of options. You can play around generator, you can fall back to hell if needed, plus you've got the ability to peek out towards dice and get away from anyone pushing gen. Now although they are called sight smokes, you don't necessarily need to be on site to use them effectively. Anytime you're in a sticky situation, throwing down a smoke for yourself to play around can keep you alive. You can also throw these for teammates if you see them in a rough spot as well, buying them time while you rotate over to help. The goal here is to stall time for that player while their help is on the way. This is way better than just getting run over 1v5 as the enemy team collapses on you, and it's pretty much perfect if you're looking to defend site as a controller. Different controllers have different tools to stop pushes. Omen has his blind, Brimstone and Viper have their mollies, Astra's got her gravity well. These tools in themselves are super effective, but if you combo them with a sight smoke, you are basically never losing that sight. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about flood smokes. These might look similar to Lurk Smokes at a first glance, but they're actually generally used for a different purpose. When you're looking at a flood smoke, you'll notice that it bleeds out into the entryway a little bit, just like a Lurk Smoke does. But here's the difference. Flood smokes aren't about denying information. These bad boys are all about getting you out of those nasty choke points. Think of them as a perfect counter to the standard flush smokes that we talked about earlier. When the enemy team has you locked in with a tight smoke at a choke point, that's when a flood smoke can come in clutch. The way that it works is pretty straightforward. Just throw your smoke in so that it bleeds out over their smoke. This basically cancels out their initial flush smoke and replaces it with your new flood smoke, successfully creating a space for you to actually push forward and get out of that choke point. Now, flood smokes are especially valuable when you need to get onto site fast to help a teammate, or you don't want to let the attackers establish a good post plan. They're perfect for those moments when there just isn't enough time for you to wait out the enemy smoke. Luckily, smokes are a pretty cool piece of utility in the sense that you can easily just place a smoke of your own to cancel out your opponent's smoke. Here's another situation in which flood smokes shine though. They are absolutely incredible against oppers. Everyone knows that the closer you get to an opper, the worse it is for them. Flood smokes help you close that gap safely without getting yourself killed. The key to a flood smoke is recognizing the right moment to use it. When your team needs immediate access to a site, or when there is an opper holding down the long angle, you need to bust out of that choke point, and that's when you need to use these flood smokes the most. Now let's talk about OneWays. These aren't as common as they used to be, especially after those Omen nerfs, but don't write them off just yet. There are still some super effective OneWays that you need to know in the right spots. The setup for these is pretty straightforward. You're placing them on top of a taller surface, usually one of those double stacked boxes that you see across all the maps. When you set up a one-way properly, it creates that nasty situation where enemies pushing through them can't see you, but you can see their feet. Now, the most classic spots for one-ways are on Ascent A main and Sunset A main. These spots can completely shut down pushes through these areas, and the attackers basically have to use some form of utility to deal with these one-ways. They might drone through it, they might flash through it, sometimes they might even use a flood smoke to counter it, but they need to do something. Now here's the important thing to consider with one-ways. Smokes are considered generally a neutral piece of utility. This means that they can work for either team depending on the position and the situation present in the round. The golden rule for one-ways is whoever is closest to the smoke is actually at a disadvantage. So let's break this down with a classic Ascent A main one-way. When you're holding it from far back as a defender, it's perfect. You can see their feet and they can't see you. But if you push up and try to grab that ultimate orb, now you are the one at a disadvantage. Now that one-way is working against you because you're closer to it than the attackers are. It's a mistake that we've seen more than once to see a player place a one-way that benefits them, only to scale up and find out that it's actually working against them now. They'll get a pick or two and think that they can push up for more, but pushing your own one-way is basically asking to get punished. Now, this is super important to remember. So before you place a one-way, think about where you want to go. Are you going to need to push through that area in the next 15 to 20 seconds? Because if you are, that one-way might end up being an issue. Even if it seems good in the short term, you need to think about how it affects your options later. Now, the best one-ways are the ones that lock down an area that you don't plan on pushing through anyway. This way, you're forcing the enemies to either respect the smoke or use utility to deal with it. And either way, you're coming out ahead in the utility game. Now let's talk about spike smokes, and these are absolutely crucial when you're retaking a site on defense. Something that most players get wrong is that when they're retaking, you don't always want to smoke the entrances. Instead, if you're already on site, it could be better to smoke off the spike instead. It's pretty simple. By smoking the spike, you force the attackers to make some really uncomfortable decisions. They basically got two options, and both of them suck. They can either spam through the smoke, which leaves them super vulnerable to getting swung and also reveals their position if it was already unknown, or they have to rush into the smoke, which is also a scary situation to be because you don't want to normally be pushing smoke. Now, these smokes are especially powerful to know if you're playing Clove, since you'll also be able to smoke after death. That one smoke can literally win your team the round if used well. Smoking the spike is particularly nasty in 1v2 situations. Let's say you don't know where both enemies are. Instead of walking around trying to clear out every single angle, by smoking the spike and tapping it, you put the pressure on the offense. They'll either have to spam through the smoke or they'll have to swing into it. Either way, they're giving up their position. For this reason, before you set up for a post plant, check if the enemy controller is alive. If they do have a controller alive, you might want to rethink playing off of site and allowing the defenders to get to the spike. Because the second that they smoke the spike and tap it, you are in a really rough spot. You'll be stuck either spamming through the smoke or pushing into it blind. Now remember, these smokes are primarily a defensive tool. As an attacker in post plant, you generally want to keep vision on the spike at all times, so you won't really ever place spike smokes except in those very niche situations. You need to know if somebody's sticking the defuse or just tapping it. And that's exactly what these smokes take away from you, which is what makes them so powerful on retakes. Finally, let's talk about the line smokes from Viper and Harbor's Wall. These are a bit different from your standard smokes, but I figured they were worth mentioning anyway. Think of them as just a standard smoke that covers way more ground. These really shine on bigger maps like Breeze and Icebox when you need to cover more space. Now the trade-off is pretty clear though, you're locked into that line shape. That's both a strength and limitation. Sure, you can cover a lot of ground with one piece of utility, but you can't always place them exactly where you want them. You also often need specific positions to throw them from, which can be a bit funkier to use. The best Viper players generally get the most value using line smokes similar to Lurk Smokes. They'll place these walls in spots that cut off multiple sight lines at once, creating massive knowledge gaps in the enemy team. To get any info, the enemies have to push through multiple angles, oftentimes posing a ton of risk to them. Harbor's walls work in a similar way as well. The main difference is that Harbor gets to curve his smoke. This gives him a bit more flexibility in how he covers areas. He can actually shape his smokes to cover the specific spots that he wants. As mentioned, line smokes are especially valuable on maps like Breeze and Icebox, but teams oftentimes like to run a line smoker in their comps as an additional controller so that they can block off a lot of information for the enemy team. They won't normally use these smokes for executes, but instead they'll use them to make their offense a little bit less predictable. Just remember that placing these takes a little bit more planning than regular smokes, and if you don't play Viper or Harbor normally, you're probably going to want to do a little bit of research before you do. But when you get it right, line smokes can absolutely control huge portions of the map and can be very valuable. And remember, if you're struggling to rank up, then let me tell you that we can help you out today and get you back on track and climbing now. As mentioned with our brand new Call Me Aim course, we will teach you everything that you need to know about how aiming has developed over the last 10 years. We'll teach you the established proper technique that aim pros use to maximize their accuracy and with far less. Aiming can feel hard sometimes, but we'll make it stupid simple and get you ranking up in no time or your money back. Don't forget, site subscribers also get direct access to our coaches in Discord so that you can get personalized feedback just for you. Nobody understands how to climb out a low elo more than us, so if you're looking to rank up, be sure to check out SkillCapped using the link below. And other than that, my name is Casey, and I'll catch you in the next one.